He should have died that night. A storm raged through the Colorado mountains, ice slicing like knives, trees howling in protest. And there, collapsed in the snow like a discarded shadow, was a German shepherd, alone, bleeding, frozen to the bone, no name, no hope, until an 8-year-old boy opened the door. What followed is not just a rescue, it's a bond that defied instinct, memory, and even death. A forgotten hero, a grieving child, and a storm that would bring them together. This is the story of Jasper. And what happened next will echo in your heart long after the snow melts. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. And if you believe in loyalty, in second chances, in the quiet power of love between a boy and a dog, hit that subscribe button, because this story, it's going to stay with you forever. Grand Mesa, Colorado, midwinter. The wind screamed down from the high ridges of Grand Mesa like something wounded and wild. Snow fell in ragged sideways sheets, piling high on the sloped roofs of log cabins and burying every road in white silence. It was the kind of night that closed doors, silenced radios, and made even the bravest mountain folks think twice before stepping outside. But one light still burned on the edge of the forest, flickering through the window of a weathered cabin, clinging to the mountain like a secret. Inside, Wyatt Turner, an 8-year-old boy with shaggy chestnut hair and oversized flannel pajamas, pressed his face to the window. His breath fogged the glass, but he refused to look away. Something tugged at him, something just beyond the darkness. Wyatt had the wiry frame of a child who'd grown up among trees and wind, his cheeks always pink from cold, and his wide hazel eyes always scanning, searching. Since the avalanche last year that had taken his parents, Wyatt had stopped asking questions out loud. But he never stopped listening. Behind him, June Turner, his paternal grandmother, stirred a pot of venison stew on the wood stove. June was in her early 70s, small and wiry, her silver hair always in a tight bun. Years of mountain life had carved lines deep into her face, but her eyes remained sharp, ice blue, and unblinking. A retired school teacher, June had been firm but fair with generations of Glenmore children. Grief had hardened her, made her quieter but not cold. Her love for Wyatt was fierce, if quiet, like everything else she did. "You shouldn't be up so late, Wyatt," she said without turning. "The storm's not going to ease up tonight." Wyatt didn't respond. Instead, he pressed his hand against the pane. "There's something out there." June looked over, tired. "Ain't nothing but wind and snow tonight, sweetheart." But then came the sound. Not a howl, not a growl, something in between. Low, strained, and cut short like a breath frozen halfway. June put down the ladle. Wyatt was already pulling on his boots. Outside, the world was a blur of white and motion. The wind slapped Wyatt's face with icy fingers as he stepped down from the porch. A flashlight gripped tight in his mittened hand. He scanned the snow, heart pounding, until the beam caught something. A mound, just off the trail. At first, it looked like a pile of fallen branches, tangled and dark. But then it moved. Wyatt gasped. It was a dog, a large one. Maybe the biggest he'd ever seen. The animal lay half buried in snow, one side of its body trembling, the other death still. Its coat was black and tan, matted with ice, the coloring unmistakable. A German shepherd, powerful shoulders, thick tail, ears flattened from exhaustion. But it wasn't the size that stopped Wyatt. It was the eyes, amber-colored, dulled by pain, but watching. Alert. Wyatt dropped to his knees, not caring that snow seeped into his pajamas. "Hey, boy. Hey. It's okay." The dog gave a weak whine. Wyatt reached for the collar and found it barely holding on, frayed and coated in frozen mud. Attached to it was a small rusted metal tag. He squinted through the snow, rubbing it with his thumb. Jasper. The letters were scratched and faded, but there, undeniable. "Jasper," Wyatt whispered. "Is that your name?" The dog made a faint sound, a half growl, half sigh, as if in agreement. "Hang on, I'll get help." By the time June reached them with a wool blanket and flashlight of her own, Wyatt had already wrapped his coat over the animal's back. She hesitated at the sight, her instincts shouting danger. But something in the way the dog looked at the boy softened her. "You sure about this?" she asked. "He's hurt, Grandma. We can't leave him here. He has a name." The dog gave another quiet whine. June exhaled. "All right, but he stays in the mudroom. And you keep your hands away from that muzzle till we know he ain't rabid." They pulled him in together, Wyatt guiding, June dragging the back legs onto the blanket. The dog was heavy, maybe 80 pounds or more, and limp from cold. Inside, they made a nest of old quilts near the fireplace. The heat hit him like a tidal wave. Jasper didn't move at first, only blinked. Then, slowly, he lowered his head onto Wyatt's knee. June watched the exchange in silence, then brought a small bowl of warm broth and set it nearby. "Don't let him gulp too much. If he's been out long, his stomach won't take it." Wyatt nodded, stroking the dog's frozen fur. "He's gonna be okay now." Behind them, the radio crackled from the counter, static giving way to a voice. Peter Mayfield, their neighbor 2 cabins down, and a retired forest ranger, had left his emergency band open. The signal wasn't clear, but the words cut through. "Unit 14, missing 3 weeks. German Shepherd. Name Jasper." June froze. Wyatt didn't even hear her anymore. His attention was on the heartbeat beneath the fur, slow but steady. "You're home now, Jasper," he whispered. "You're safe." Outside, the storm raged on. But inside, for the first time in months, Wyatt felt something thaw. The next morning broke pale and frozen with the light of a cloud-choked sun filtering through the frosted windows of the cabin. Snow still drifted lazily across the porch, but the worst of the storm had passed, leaving a fragile stillness behind like the breath held between verses of a forgotten song. Inside, Wyatt sat cross-legged on the braided rug near the fireplace, watching Jasper with an intensity only children possess. The dog had barely moved through the night except for the shallow rise and fall of his chest. Wyatt had placed a thick wool blanket over him, tucked in the edges like he'd seen Grandma do with quilts. Jasper's eyes remained half-lidded amber, peering out from under ice-encrusted lashes. Every so often his ears twitched. But he didn't bark, didn't growl, just existed quiet, heavy, and near. Wyatt reached out with cautious fingers and touched the dog's leg. The fur was rough and still damp beneath the warmth of the room. There, hidden under clumps of matted hair and dried blood, he saw the wound deep and jagged, slicing across the front right paw. Not fresh, but not yet healed. He took the towel he'd left soaking in warm water and pressed it gently against the injury. Jasper flinched but didn't pull away. "You're tough," Wyatt whispered. "Like you've been through something way worse than snow." From the kitchen, June Turner leaned on the counter holding a chipped coffee mug between her hands. Her eyes narrowed as she watched her grandson tend to the dog. She didn't interfere, not yet. But every few minutes she cast a glance toward the old shotgun by the door, a habit born not of fear, but of preparation. By midday, Jasper tried to stand. He pushed himself up with trembling limbs, his injured paw tucked close to his chest. Wyatt scrambled forward. "Easy. You're okay. Just rest." The dog looked at him long and deliberate, then slowly lowered himself back down. He rested his head near Wyatt's knee, and the boy smiled without realizing it. Later that afternoon, the sound of tires crunching on snow signaled the arrival of a neighbor. A rusty green pickup truck pulled up beside the cabin, and out stepped Peter Mayfield. In his late 60s, Peter had a body built from decades of climbing ridgelines and splitting wood, broad-shouldered, a bit stooped, with gray stubble framing a wind-chapped face. He wore a canvas coat with a faded forest ranger patch still stitched to the shoulder. He hadn't been on active duty in 5 years, but old instincts died hard. June opened the door before he knocked. "Morning, Peter." "Snow finally gave us a break," he said, stamping snow from his boots. "Heard your radio was still on. Thought I'd check in." She stepped aside. "We've had a visitor." Peter's boots paused just over the threshold as his eyes landed on the figure curled near the fire. "Well, I'll be damned." Wyatt turned from his spot. "This is Jasper." Peter knelt beside the dog slowly, respectfully. He didn't try to touch him, just observed. German Shepherd. Male. Military or rescue training from the looks of it. You see that stance? Even hurt. He's alert. "I found his name on his collar," Wyatt said. "It was really faded." Peter nodded. "I've heard that name before. Few weeks back there was chatter on the old ranger frequencies. A search team out in Gunnison lost a rescue dog during a landslide. Said he was highly trained. German Shepherd. Name was Jasper. June raised an eyebrow. You think this is him? Don't know for sure, but if it is... He stood rubbing his neck. That dog's been through hell, survived miles in the mountains, maybe weeks on his own. That kind of endurance, it's rare. Wyatt's eyes widened. You think he remembers his team? Peter shrugged. Hard to say. But dogs don't forget pain. Or kindness. Peter left an hour later, promising to check with his old contacts and see if anyone was still looking for Jasper officially. He didn't say much else, but the way he looked at the dog before leaving like he knew something big was beginning left June quietly uneasy. That night Jasper made it halfway across the room before collapsing again, his limbs stiff but determined. Wyatt helped prop him up with a rolled blanket. The dog didn't flinch from the boy's touch anymore. When Wyatt brought over a small bowl of leftover stew, mostly broth, no onion, Jasper sniffed it, then began to eat in slow, careful bites. June watched from the rocker, knitting in her lap, her fingers moving slower than usual. He's choosing to stay, she said softly. Wyatt turned, confused. What do you mean? She met his gaze. Animals know when it's time to die. If he wanted to, he could have crawled into the woods and gone quiet. But he came here. To you. Wyatt didn't know what to say. He just looked at Jasper, whose eyes were now brighter, and whispered again, You're safe. That night Jasper didn't sleep by the fire. Instead, he limped over to Wyatt's small bed tucked under the cabin eaves and curled at its base. When Wyatt awoke once hours before dawn, he found the dog watching the window ears, twitching at every creak in the night. A silent companion guarding dreams he didn't share. The morning came with an eerie stillness, the kind of hush that settles after a storm has emptied itself. The snow outside glistened under a dull silver sky, and from the Turner cabin's chimney rose a thin, steady stream of smoke. Inside, the fire cracked softly, but the warmth did little to ease the tension thickening in the air. Peter Mayfield returned just after sunrise, bundled against the cold in a waxed canvas parka and a hunter green wool beanie. In one gloved hand, he carried a magnifying glass and a small metal brush, the kind used to clean old tools or rifle bolts. His face was red from the cold, his breath puffing like steam as he stepped into the mudroom. June opened the door before he could knock. She was still in her thick plaid robe, and her hair, usually tied up, hung loose around her shoulders, a rare sight. Coffee's hot, she said simply, and stepped aside. Peter nodded. I won't be long. Wyatt sat by the fire again, his legs folded beneath him, watching Jasper, who now sat upright, albeit stiffly. The dog's eyes followed every movement in the room. He didn't bark or growl when Peter approached, just tilted his head slightly, ears twitching in mild curiosity. Peter knelt beside him, speaking low and calm. Hey there, fella. You remember me? Jasper made no move but didn't retreat either. Peter gently pulled the collar forward, revealing the rusted, weather-worn metal tag still affixed to the underside of the strap. He used the brush to clear flakes of dried mud and a bit of resin stuck to the grooves. Then he peered through the magnifying glass. The front still read Jasper in etched block letters, but it was the back he focused on, where time and exposure had nearly wiped away whatever had been carved there. After several minutes of brushing, squinting, and adjusting angles under the window light, Peter exhaled sharply. There, he said, tapping the tag. Barely legible, but it's there. What is it? Wyatt asked, moving closer. Peter read slowly, Unit 14, Gunnison Rescue, ID 7D4327. He pulled a small notepad from his coat pocket and wrote it down, then looked at Wyatt. That's a formal identifier. No one etches that unless it's a trained dog. This confirms he was registered. Wyatt said nothing. He looked at Jasper, who now rested his head across his paws, blinking slowly as if bored by the discussion of his past. Peter stood. I've got an old contact. Works dispatch for the Western Division. She'll know what this ID means if there's an active report or recovery effort, the works. June poured him coffee while he stepped outside to get a signal. Cell service was erratic this high up, but Peter knew the exact slope of the porch to lean against for the best chance. He waited, his breath fogging the screen, fingers slightly trembling, not from the cold but the weight of what he might confirm. A few minutes passed. Then a reply. He walked back in slower than he had left, closed the door behind him with care, and looked at both June and Wyatt. It's him, he said. They've been looking for him for over 3 weeks. His unit assumed he was killed in the landslide near Elk Hollow. He vanished during a night operation, part of a search and rescue after an avalanche buried a hiking trail. Wyatt swallowed. So he's a real rescue dog? Peter nodded. Not just real. Decorated. one of the highest performing dogs they had. He's credited with at least 12 successful rescues. They called him the Quiet Ace because he worked without barking, always listened, always found people. Wyatt looked down. His voice was quiet. He found me. Peter's face softened. Yeah, he did. For a moment, silence returned, broken only by the steady ticking of the old wall clock and the occasional pop from the fireplace. Then Peter added more gently, "They'll want him back." Wyatt flinched, his mouth tightening. He didn't speak, but his fists clenched slightly in the fabric of his pants. Jasper seemed to sense the shift, lifting his head, nudging his nose toward the boy's hand. I didn't rescue him," Wyatt whispered. "He rescued me. From being alone. From everything after Mom and Dad." His voice broke and he turned away quickly. Jasper stood wobbly but determined and stepped beside him. The dog pressed his large head into the boy's side and stood there still and firm, as if anchoring him to the world. June wiped her hands on her robe, her voice firmer now. "Peter who decides what happens to him. Technically the department. But there are procedures. If an animal is declared missing and then recovered, the unit usually regains custody. That said," he paused, watching Wyatt, "public opinion matters, so do circumstances. It's not unheard of for a retired dog to stay with the person who found him, especially if the bond's strong." Wyatt didn't look up, but his voice came clearer this time. "I won't let them take him." Peter crouched again, looking Jasper in the eye. "Let's take this one step at a time. I'll keep talking to my contact, see what options there are." He stood to leave, but paused at the door. "This isn't just a dog anymore, Wyatt. He's got a history. That means people might come looking. Be ready." That night, after Peter left, June found Wyatt sitting in the mudroom beside Jasper again. The boy had wrapped himself in a quilt and curled close to the dog, who now rested without shivering. The wound on his paw still looked raw, but Jasper didn't seem to mind. His eyes were clearer now, a little brighter. June didn't say anything at first. Then from the doorway she said, "He's got his own storm to carry, but maybe yours and his, they cancel each other out a little." Wyatt looked over. "What if they take him?" June shrugged, her voice low. "Then we fight, but not before they knock." He didn't smile, but he nodded. Outside, the snow began to fall again, but softly this time, more like a lullaby than a threat. By the fourth day, Jasper was no longer the ghost of a dog they had dragged in from the snow. The wound on his front paw had scabbed into something dark and healing, his movements steadier and his appetite stronger. He still limped slightly, but there was a sharpness in his gaze now, like an ember reigniting beneath old ash. Outside Grand Mesa lay frozen under a pale sky, the forest bowed with weight of ice. But inside the cabin the air was warmer, easier, if only for a little while. Wyatt had taken to talking to Jasper constantly about everything and nothing. About his parents and the old treehouse they built together. About the time he broke his arm falling off the barn roof. About how sometimes at night the cabin felt too big for just him and Grandma. Jasper never barked, but he listened. Always. That night, however, Jasper was not calm. It started with the way his ears angled toward the window, rigid, trained. Then came the low growl rumbling from deep within his chest. Not angry, not frightened, just alert. His amber eyes stayed fixed on the darkness beyond the frost-covered glass, and he didn't blink. Wyatt sat up from the couch. "What is it?" June, across the room, folding blankets, paused. Jasper stood now, stiff and bristling his body between Wyatt and the door. The sound came next. A crunch. Not the wind. Something slower. More deliberate. Something moving across the frozen path just outside the cabin. June grabbed the lantern from the table. "Stay back," she warned. Wyatt hesitated. Jasper didn't. The dog moved to the door with a fluid, limping stride and pressed his snout to the crack between wood and frame. Another growl. Then silence. June opened the door slowly. Cold burst in like a slap. Jasper pushed past her and bounded onto the porch, then down the steps, nose low, tail straight. "Jasper," Wyatt called, rushing to put on boots. "Wait," June said, grabbing her coat. They followed the dog into the trees just past the tree line. The snow here was untouched until now. Jasper circled once, then twice, his body low to the ground. Then he stopped at a thicket of underbrush, tail wagging once, then going stiff. June raised the lantern. Wyatt gasped. Tracks. Not deer. Not elk. Wolves. The paw prints were unmistakable, larger than Jasper's, deep in the snow. But more disturbing than that was what came next, a second set of prints. Smaller, human, booted, heading in the same direction. "Someone's been here," June said under her breath. They followed Jasper a few paces more until he stopped beside a tree near the creek. There, half buried in ice, was something metallic. June leaned down and used a stick to clear it. It was a steel jaw trap, rusted, frozen, and already sprung. Something had stepped in it before. The snow around it was stained with old blood. "This is illegal," June muttered. "No one's allowed to set traps this close to a residence." Jasper growled again, turning his head toward the thicker trees upstream. Peter arrived the next morning. He parked his truck closer than usual and came in with snow still crusted on his boots. June had already made coffee. She met him on the porch and told him everything. He listened, his jaw tightening with each word. "I thought I heard something on the radio 2 nights ago. Movement picked up by a backcountry sensor on Pine Hollow Trail. They assumed it was moose or stray elk, but I'm not so sure now." Inside, Wyatt sat at the table tracing the wolf prints into his notebook. He looked up as Peter entered. Why would someone be out there with traps? Peter sat down heavily. "Could be poachers. We've had trouble the past 2 seasons. Mostly at lower elevations. They set traps to catch fur-bearing animals, martens, foxes, even bobcats. But those traps don't know the difference between a bobcat and a hiker's dog." He looked at Jasper, who now sat beneath the window, eyes half-lidded but alert. "Think he's still on edge?" Wyatt asked. Peter nodded. "Dogs like him are trained to notice things we can't. Sounds, scents, intentions. If he's acting strange, trust that something's wrong." Later that day, Peter went out with snowshoes and a field pack tracing the path Jasper had led them down. It took him nearly 2 hours to reach the ridgeline where the creek cut sharp against the old mine road. That's where he found a second trap. This one unsprung but recently placed. Nearby, faint in the snow, were boot prints again. Different size, not heavy work boots, lighter, maybe hiking shoes. That detail chilled him more than the trap itself. He flagged the location with a red ribbon and took photos. The Forest Service would need to see this. When he returned to the cabin, Wyatt was outside with Jasper tossing a rubber ball he'd dug out of the shed. Jasper chased after it with newfound energy, his gait still uneven but stronger. Peter watched from the porch, then called Wyatt over. "I might have to file a formal report," he said, "which means rangers might come up here to investigate." Wyatt looked nervous. "Will they take Jasper?" Peter shook his head. "Not for this. But it does mean more eyes on this area, which, if those traps keep appearing, might not be a bad thing." June stepped out, arms crossed. "Let them come. Maybe someone should remind folks we still protect this land." That night, Jasper refused to sleep near the fire. Instead, he lay facing the front door, ears twitching, his breath slow and steady, but his body never fully at rest. Wyatt watched him for a while before climbing into bed. Outside, snow fell again, slow, quiet, almost gentle. But beneath the trees, shadows still moved. The storm came without warning. 1 minute the sky was still stars poking through the clouds like flickers of forgotten light. The next it was all wind and snow howling through the trees, battering windows, shaking the cabin as if something ancient had woken. Wyatt stirred in his sleep, tangled in blankets, the air cold against his face, despite the fire still alive in the hearth. Jasper was already awake. The dog stood by the window, muscles taut, ears high. He paced once back and forth, then turned sharply toward the stairs leading to the loft where Wyatt slept. His breath came faster now, and a soft, urgent whine rose from his throat. Then, without hesitation, he bounded up the steps, limp and all. Wyatt groaned as Jasper's weight hit the bed. "What is it?" Jasper didn't bark. He grabbed the edge of Wyatt's pajama top with his teeth and tugged, not hard enough to hurt, but insistent. Another crack came from outside, this one sharper, splitting, like the bones of the earth giving way. Grandma Wyatt called out, throwing off the covers. There was no answer from the room below. Jasper moved fast, leaping down the stairs, then stopping by the front door. He turned and looked at Wyatt waiting. The boy barely had time to jam his feet into his snow boots and throw on his coat before Jasper pushed open the door with his body. The cold struck them like a wave. The wind was a wall, and in the weak light from the porch they saw it, the towering pine near the side of the cabin, its trunk cracking from the weight of snow and age. And then, like the universe exhaling, it began to fall. Jasper barked once loud, sharp commanding and shoved his body into Wyatt's side. The boy stumbled back off the porch just as the tree came down, crashing onto the cabin with a roar that drowned out even the wind. Snow exploded into the air like white smoke. Shingles and branches scattered. Wyatt hit the ground hard, and for a second all he could hear was the pounding of his heart. Then a warmth beside him, Jasper panting, his body curled slightly around the boy. Grandma Wyatt shouted. June had been asleep in her bedroom, positioned away from where the tree fell, and emerged minutes later through the back door in slippers and a coat. Her face was pale but calm. "I'm okay, Wyatt. We're here," he called back. When Peter arrived the next morning, it was on snowshoes. The road had become impassable overnight, and he carried a thermal satchel strapped to his back full of water bottles and energy packs. His breath came hard from the climb, and his beard was frosted white by the time he reached the cabin. He stopped cold when he saw the damage. Half the roof caved in the pine's trunk, cleaving it like a lightning bolt frozen in time. But Wyatt and June were both outside clearing snow and gathering salvageable firewood into a tarp. Jasper stood nearby, ever watchful. "Is everyone all right?" Peter asked, breathless. "We were lucky," June replied. "Or maybe just looked out for." Peter approached Wyatt, clapped a gloved hand on his shoulder. "I heard it from 3 cabins down. You were outside." "He got me out," Wyatt said, motioning to Jasper. "Pulled me from my bed." Peter looked at the dog, who stared back, steady and unblinking. He knew. Before it started. Peter exhaled. That dog's got instincts most men would kill for. That afternoon, Peter took photos of the damage and sent them to his contact at the regional ranger office. But he also made another call to the local newspaper in Glenmore. He didn't mention names. Just the story. By the next morning, the front page of the town section bore a photo of the snowy pine wreckage and a headline, "Rescue Dog Saves Boy in Surprise Storm Again." The article was brief, but the story took hold quickly. Online forums picked it up. Local stations asked for interviews. But June politely refused them all. "He doesn't need strangers asking about what he lost," she said, referring both to Jasper and her grandson. Still, the attention brought something else: questions. Who was the dog? Where had he come from, and why had he risked himself for a child he barely knew? Peter, meanwhile, doubled his efforts with the Forest Service. The traps discovered earlier, combined with the unauthorized presence near the cabin, and now a major tree fall, were enough to warrant investigation. He called in a request for aerial surveillance and mentioned the possibility of illegal poaching activity increasing in the backwoods. "I don't like the pattern," he told June as they sipped coffee in the still-standing portion of the cabin. "It's too much all at once. Someone's been pushing boundaries out there." Jasper sat at the threshold, eyes facing the forest. He didn't sleep as much anymore. He watched, listened, waited. That evening, as the storm faded and the stars returned to their places, Wyatt sat on the floor tracing a map of the nearby woods. Jasper lay beside him, his nose occasionally nudging the paper. "Did you always do this?" Wyatt asked softly. "Before me." The dog didn't answer, of course, but he didn't look away either. June stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "You gave him a reason to fight Wyatt, and I think he gave you one too." 3 days after the storm, the mountain road was finally cleared enough for vehicles to reach the Turner cabin. The quiet that had settled like snow over Grand Mesa was broken by the low rumble of tires on packed ice. Wyatt was sitting by the fireplace with Jasper's head resting in his lap when he heard it: 2 sets of engines slowing, stopping. Then the creak of car doors opening. Jasper stirred immediately, his ears perked, body going rigid beneath Wyatt's hand. Then he stood and padded to the door, nose to the bottom edge. He didn't growl, he didn't bark, but he stood tall and unmoving, like a soldier returning to the front lines. Peter was already outside when they arrived. He had been expecting them. 2 individuals stepped from the lead vehicle. The first was a tall woman in her 40s, lean with a functional posture and a buzz cut under her ranger cap. Her name was Captain Leona Sykes, lead coordinator of Gunnison's K-9 Search and Rescue Unit. Her skin was sun-bronzed and weathered, and her eyes were a hard military gray, sharp and quick, but not unkind. Her movements were precise, as if every gesture had once been rehearsed under pressure. Beside her was Officer Marco Ruiz, younger, compact, with dark curly hair and thick-framed glasses. He looked more like a college TA than a ranger, but Peter knew him from the academy: sharp-minded, gentle with animals, and fluent in 3 languages, including the quiet one spoken between handler and dog. They shook hands with June and Peter before turning toward the cabin. Captain Sykes removed her gloves as she stepped onto the porch. "We're here for Jasper." Inside, Wyatt froze. June opened the door. "He's been expecting you." Jasper stood in the center of the room, body relaxed but posture straight. His tail didn't wag. His gaze stayed locked on the uniformed woman entering his space. Jasper Sykes said softly, removing her cap and crouching to meet his eyes. "Unit 14. Command return." Jasper didn't move. Ruiz tried next. "It's okay, buddy. We've missed you. You did good." Jasper glanced between them, then looked at Wyatt, who hadn't moved from the hearth. Sykes rose slowly. "He remembers." "He doesn't want to go," Wyatt said, his voice a whisper that cracked halfway through. Peter stepped forward gently, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "There might be another way." Sykes looked to him. "You're suggesting a transfer of custody?" "Something like that. The boys bonded with him. They've saved each other. I propose a town hearing, let the people decide." Ruiz raised a brow. "We don't usually conduct ownership transfers this way." Peter's voice was calm but firm. "Nothing about this situation is usual, and I think you'll find the community has strong opinions about what Jasper means to this town." That evening, word spread fast. Peter called in a favor from the town's community coordinator to reserve space in Glenmore's town hall. Flyers were made. June even allowed Wyatt's photo with Jasper to be shared on the town's online bulletin. The headline read, "Should a hero be sent back or stay where he's needed most?" The turnout exceeded expectations. Glenmore's town hall, a cedar-trimmed building usually reserved for holiday craft fairs and budget meetings, buzzed with voices and camera flashes. Locals packed every bench. Some knew Jasper's story from the newspaper, others from neighbors. Some had seen the boy and the dog walking the ridge trail every morning since the storm. Peter spoke first, giving a detailed account of Jasper's rescue, his recovery, and the events that followed: the traps, the tree collapse, the instinct that had saved Wyatt's life. Then came Sarah Brenner, the school's speech therapist, a tall woman in her early 50s with long auburn hair braided down her back. Sarah was known for her quiet strength and fierce protection of children. After losing her son to a rare illness years before, she had become a fierce advocate for emotional therapy dogs in schools. "I watched this boy speak for the first time in weeks," Sarah said into the mic, her voice clear and unwavering. "Not to me. To that dog. If that's not rescue, I don't know what is." Others shared stories of animals who'd stayed, who'd chosen. And then came the counter voices. A retired fireman stood and said, "That dog's trained to save lives. Every day he spends here is one less person he could be helping somewhere else." Another woman echoed, "If we all kept what saved us, nothing would ever go back to doing its job." The room stirred, divided. Captain Sykes stood, her voice even. "This isn't about affection, it's about service. But it's also about honoring what a dog chooses when the training is over." Finally, Wyatt stepped forward. He didn't need the mic. The room went quiet as he looked at everyone, then down at Jasper, who had walked beside him. "I know I'm just a kid," he said, "but I know what it's like to lose someone. And I know what it's like to not be seen. Jasper saw me when no one else did. And maybe he doesn't bark or wag or do tricks, but he stays. Every night. In the dark. Just stays. That's what I needed. That's what he gave me." Silence followed. Then a slow, single clap. Then more. Not loud. Not raucous. Just real. That night the town didn't vote, at least not officially. But Sykes pulled Peter aside before leaving and said, "I'll submit the paperwork for retirement status. Jasper's earned that right." Back at the cabin, Wyatt fell asleep with his head resting on Jasper's flank. The dog's eyes stayed open long after the boys closed. The sun filtered through the pines with that thin winter light that looked warm but offered no heat. Snow crunched underfoot as Wyatt walked beside his grandmother along the narrow ridge trail, heading toward Glenmore for a supply run and to visit the community center. It had been a quiet few days since the town hall meeting. No visitors, no arguments, just the slow, strange peace of a mountain finally catching its breath. Jasper trotted ahead, alert but calm, his injured paw now nearly healed, though he still favored it slightly when the cold set in. June Turner walked steadily, bundled in a navy blue coat that swallowed her thin frame. Her gloved hand gripped a hiking pole, not because she needed it, but because she liked to be prepared. She was a woman shaped by routine and weather, carved by the early death of her husband and the later grief of her son. Her back was straighter than most women her age, her voice still firm when she used it. But since Jasper came into their lives, even her silences had softened. They rounded a bend where the trail curved sharply along a granite outcropping. The cliff beside them sloped down 50 feet to a rocky creek, now frozen over, the path narrowed by snowdrift. Wyatt, chasing a snowflake with his eyes, stepped slightly ahead, and then his boot slipped. Wyatt June shouted. His scream tore through the trees as his legs gave out beneath him, body sliding off the trail's edge. For one suspended moment, the world froze. Then Jasper moved. The German shepherd didn't hesitate. He leapt after the boy, launching down the slope with precision born of training and instinct. Snow scattered in his wake like spray. Wyatt tumbled halfway down the incline, one hand scraping against a jagged rock, the other grabbing wildly at air. Just before he would have gone over the final drop down to the creek bed below, Jasper lunged forward and grabbed hold of Wyatt's coat collar with his teeth. The weight nearly pulled the dog down with him, but Jasper braced. Paws splayed wide, body low to the slope. He dug in with everything he had, holding Wyatt there, dangling between fall and survival. The boy whimpered, then gasped, clutching the frozen ground with trembling hands. "I've got it," he whispered, voice thin with fear. But Jasper didn't let go. It was Deputy Lana Reeves who heard the scream from a nearby patrol loop. She was mid-30s, sturdy and fast-moving, with a shock of red hair always pulled into a tight braid and a voice that carried like a horn. She had been a wilderness EMT before joining the sheriff's department, known for her unshakable calm and fierce determination. She was on snowmobile patrol when the radio crackled with June's panicked voice. "My grandson, he fell off Ridge 7 trail. The dogs got him. We need help now." Lana arrived 10 minutes later with a second responder, Riley Chen, a lanky, soft-spoken park rescue tech barely out of college, always scribbling notes on his waterproof tablet. The two approached carefully, throwing a rope down to Wyatt as Jasper held position, eyes wide, muzzle tight around the boy's collar. "It's okay," Lana said gently. "We've got you. We see you, buddy. Just a little longer." They pulled Wyatt up first, slow, steady, his cheeks, pale lips cracked from cold. As soon as he cleared the edge, he turned. "Jasper, don't leave him down there." But Jasper was already climbing. Once Wyatt's weight was off his collar, the dog scrambled up the incline on his own, slipping once, catching again, then bounding the last few feet. When he reached the top, he didn't collapse. He simply walked to Wyatt and laid his head against the boy's chest. June fell to her knees, hugging them both. Later that day, someone uploaded a video shot from Lana's body camera showing the moment Jasper gripped Wyatt's coat and held him fast above the ravine. The footage was shaky, but unmistakable. The boy dangling the dog anchored the trust between them, forged in frozen breath and quiet heroism. Within 24 hours, the video had over 500,000 views. By the next morning, it had been picked up by NBC Denver, then CNN. Hashtags appeared, hashtag Jasper, the rescue, Grand Mesa, hero, he held on. Teachers used it as a lesson in loyalty. Veterans praised it as a story of courage. One senator from Colorado retweeted the video with the words, "Not all heroes wear boots." Then came the call. A representative from Mountain Line Broadcasting, a regional TV network, reached out to June directly. Her name was Mara Ellison, a woman in her early 40s with sleek brown hair glasses that always caught the light and a warm, practiced tone honed through decades of interviewing families during both crisis and triumph. She requested to feature Wyatt and Jasper in a televised segment called Voices from the Ridge. June hesitated, but Wyatt nodded. "It's not just about me," he said quietly. "It's about him." They agreed. The interview was set for the community center in Glenmore, not far from where the town hall meeting had taken place. The set was simple, a wooden bench, pine backdrop, soft studio lighting. Wyatt wore his flannel shirt and combed his hair with trembling fingers. Jasper sat beside him wearing the navy vest the rescue unit had given him, freshly laundered. Mara kept her questions gentle. "Wyatt, when Jasper grabbed your coat, what did you feel? Safe," he answered without hesitation. "Like he'd do anything to keep me here." The segment aired that weekend, and the story of a boy, a dog, and a frozen cliff traveled far beyond Glenmore. But back in the cabin where the wind once again hummed through pine branches, Jasper slept curled at the foot of Wyatt's bed. He didn't know about the video. He didn't need to. He had already chosen where he belonged. Spring had not yet come to Glenmore, but the air no longer cut like glass. The The snow along the creek beds had begun to melt in hesitant streams, and the trees, though still bare, swayed with the subtle promise of change. Inside the town's small school auditorium, every folding chair was taken. Parents stood along the back wall, cameras poised, and a few reporters from regional stations hovered respectfully near the exits. The stage was modest pinewood panels. Maroon curtains faded from sun, but the atmosphere was electric. At the center of the room, Jasper, in his deep navy support vest, sat poised on the makeshift stage, his ears alert and his gaze calm. Beside him stood Wyatt, dressed in a buttoned shirt and dark jeans, nervously clutching the edge of a paper he had written himself. The crowd hushed as Principal Marlene Crosby, a tall, stoop-shouldered woman in her 60s with a voice honed by decades of hallway duty, stepped up to the mic. This morning, she began, we honor not only a student but a member of our greater Glenmore family. Jasper, a retired rescue dog who has saved lives not once but twice this winter, represents the quiet courage that reminds us what it means to protect one another. She turned, lifting a small blue velvet box and opening it to reveal a silver medal etched with the seal of the Colorado Search and Rescue Association. She pinned it gently onto the front of Jasper's vest. The room erupted in applause. Jasper didn't move. He only turned his head slightly, eyes settling on Wyatt, who beamed at him like he'd won the world. After the ceremony in the modest cafeteria lined with handmade streamers and paw-print drawings, Captain Leona Sykes from the rescue unit met with June and Peter. Her uniform was more casual today. Jacket unzipped, expression relaxed. She extended a folder to June. Official retirement papers, she said. Filed and confirmed. Jasper is yours now. Permanently. Peter, who had started carrying a worn ranger's cap again, though unofficial, smiled faintly. Good to see paperwork catch up with common sense. Sykes nodded. He chose you. We're just respecting the choice. A few days later, the rain came. It began as a gentle drizzle, washing away the last of the salt from the roads and softening the dirt paths threading through the woods. But by nightfall the wind shifted and the clouds thickened into something darker. Rain fell harder, drumming against rooftops and streaming through the gutters. In the hills surrounding Glenmore, the ground oversaturated from melting snow began to give. Creeks rose, trails vanished. Low-lying areas near the town square began to flood. Peter, now reinstated as honorary forest warden, donned his old gear for the first time in years. His silver beard glistened with rain as he coordinated with local volunteers from the Glenmore Community Watch. They set out in pairs, checking cabins, warning elderly residents, helping children into high-clearance vehicles. But it was Jasper who noticed the danger first. At the edge of the community center, where an emergency shelter had been set up, Jasper paced uneasily. His ears twitched toward the creek. Then he bolted, leaping over a wooden gate, disappearing into the downpour. Wyatt, soaked and breathless, followed him with June close behind. The creek had breached the bank near the bend behind the Harris barn. Water surged down toward a small cluster of homes whose residents hadn't yet been notified. Jasper stood at the edge of the slope, barking sharply toward the trees. Peter arrived seconds later. "What's he doing?" Wyatt pointed. "He's warning them. There were people." Two families gathered near the bottom of the hill, unaware of the fast-moving water headed their way. Peter's voice thundered through a handheld megaphone. "Evacuate now. Flash flood incoming." They scrambled uphill as water surged through the trail they'd just vacated. It swept away a wooden fence, crashed into a storage shed, and rolled down toward the town's lower fields. But no lives were lost. When it was over and the rain softened into mist, Jasper stood again at Wyatt's side. His coat soaked his eyes, tired but vigilant. He didn't need medals for that moment. He just needed to be there. In the weeks that followed, the story made the news again. But for Glenmore, the legend was already complete. Wyatt began writing. At the small desk in the corner of his room, lit by a lamp with a shade that flickered slightly every time the wind kicked the windows, he started page 1 of what would become a children's book. He called it Echo in the Storm. It wasn't just about floods or falling trees. It was about the first night Jasper appeared. About the rusted tag with the name nearly scratched off. About the feeling of waking up in a world that had gone cold and discovering that something warm, something brave had chosen to stay. He wrote, "I read your name off a piece of cold metal, but you were the one who gave me warmth first." Peter donated his old ranger maps for the illustrations. Sarah Brenner helped him with phrasing and pacing. Even Deputy Lana lent her voice for the audiobook version. The story, short and steady, traveled from Glenmore to state schools and children's hospitals, always with the same lesson: that courage comes not only in the storm, but in the quiet after when someone chooses to stay. Jasper grew older, slower, but he never stopped watching the window, and Wyatt never stopped writing. And long after the snow melted, the echoes of their story lingered like soft paw prints in thawing earth, faint but never forgotten. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't come with thunder or fire from the sky. They arrive quietly on four legs in the middle of a snowstorm, carrying no banner, but a heart willing to stay. Jasper wasn't just a rescue dog. He was a reminder that love, loyalty, and protection can come from where we least expect. And for one lonely boy, he wasn't just a companion, he was an answer to a prayer. Perhaps God doesn't always send angels with wings. Sometimes he sends them covered in fur with a name barely visible on a rusted tag, and eyes that see straight into our souls. In a world filled with noise, Jasper reminded us of the silent ways God watches over us, that he never forgets the brokenhearted, that he still sends help, sometimes in the form of a storm, and sometimes in the form of a shepherd. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments. Write amen if you believe that no act of love is ever wasted and that God still works through animals, through people, through everyday grace. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that miracles still happen. Comment below and tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe in second chances, in kindness, and in the quiet heroes that walk among us, hit that subscribe button. May God bless you and your loved ones, and may you always recognize the echo of his love in the smallest moments.